Hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of LinkedIn for Leaders. I'm your host, Karan Mahaltra. We do this every week to help leaders have clarity on building their narrative in this time of AI perfection. How is it that you embrace and talk confidently about your imperfect human narrative and speak about that with confidence and care and clarity? Today, I'm grateful to welcome to the show Christian Sarkar. Hey, Christian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic to
Glad to
have
be
you.
here. Yeah.
Great that we're having this conversation. I'm going to do a quick intro of Christian and then jump into the conversation. So, Christian Sarkar is an Indian American polymath, an author, entrepreneur, consultant, activist, publisher, and artist. He's the founder of Double Loop Marketing, but he's also the founder of the following companies and initiatives with Philip Kotler. Many consider Philip to be the godfather of modern marketing. These initiatives include the Wicked7 Project, something that we're going to talk about today, the Marketing Journal, ActivistBrands, Regenerative Marketing Institute, and this is just four that I'm naming here. There are many others. You should check out Christian's LinkedIn profile. Christian's work spans a wide range of areas from art to double loop marketing and technology entrepreneurship to the activist $300 house project. In 2020, Christian was named to the Thinkers50 Radar chiefly due to his work on brand activism. So once again, thank you for being here, Christian, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And before we jump into the questions, the in Christian, you worked on the $300 house project in 2010, right?
Something like that. Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, it isn't finished. It's still going on. We actually have out of that sort of open source kind of idea that, great minds should come together all across the world to radically reinvent affordable housing.
Yes.
We ended up with, we had a challenge, we had a contest, and we ended up with some 20 winners from 300 different participants in this challenge. And one of those winners is now considered to be the future of housing, affordable housing in the developing world by the World Economic Forum. And I'll mention their name because they're very innovative. And I still think they have a lot of, they're in about 22 countries. So it's not like this is was just a blog post and stuff. It ended up becoming something. And the gentleman's name is Henny Boats, and the name of the company is Moladi, and it's out of South Africa. So it's actually a remarkable innovation from the base of the pyramid.
That's amazing. And that's actually how I first discovered Christian back in 2010. And, I then found him online on LinkedIn, and I saw one of his posts, and that's the first comment I put out that I've been following him since 2010 because of that amazing project. And there's actually, given if you just go to christiansarkar.com and you check out his work, I mean, it is such. The work itself is like a behemoth. There's so much of amazing work that he's done over time, and you can have. I mean, I'm sure we can talk endlessly for days, but we do have 26 minutes on this particular conversation. So I'm going to jump into it. So I've been fortunate enough to actually listen to the book. So Christian, if you go back to the comments in this event page, Christian very kindly shared the PDF which you can actually read the book for free. So I took that and I we are in this age of AI, so I use this tool called AudioWave AI and actually listen to the book, like binge listen to the book in 2 days. And I have to say, to every young person, especially in the Gen Z, Gen Alpha kind of space, I think it's a really great book that gives you a clear understanding of the social, financial, political, and other key factors about a range of topics that have led to our experience of life as it is today. And looking back, I think maybe in at least the last 2 decades. And in the book, Christian, you've covered everything from food scarcity and access to clean water, and their connection to conflict, why we don't need billionaires, indigenous societies, even Jamal Khashoggi, the role that he's played, the Paradise Panama and Pandora paper leaks, universal basic income, fully autonomous weapons, overpopulation, and a lot more. Why did you feel the need to write this book? And if you can also explain it through the lens of the Wicked 7 Problems framework.
Sure. So funnily enough, all of this actually starts with the $300 house. Because when we were looking at the housing problem, it wasn't just a housing problem. It was a land problem. It was an economic problem. It was a social problem. It was a government corruption problem. And that's where we ended up drawing the first map called the ecosystem of poverty.
Okay.
And that ecosystem of poverty, we're like, okay, why isn't this being solved? So we expanded it to become the ecosystem of wicked problems, all the problems of the world and why they aren't being solved. And then we had some 160 problems, which we then kind of narrowed to fine-tuned and put them in buckets. And those 7 buckets were the 7 wicked problems. And that's and this has been going on now it started in 2010, I'd say, with the $300 house. But it ended up becoming a project by itself about why is it that we have these wicked problems that we can't solve. And the 7 we came up with were the death of nature, inequality, hate and conflict, polarization. This is like a colonial problem. The British did that real well in India. They divided us so they could conquer us.
Yeah.
But now our politicians are doing that to us as people. They're dividing the people so they can win votes.
That behavior.
Power and corruption, which is the root cause of all our problems. Work in technology, the essentials of life. Why is it that our governments talk about everything, but we can't even meet the basics of community value? So, in another book, which basically I wrote while we were writing this book, Phil Kotler, myself, and Enrico Foglia wrote another book called Regeneration: The Future of Community in a Perma-Crisis World, which is really trying to get to the solutions that we outline in here. And to us, the solution is regeneration. But the idea was that we can't even meet the essential problems that people have. After 40 years of trying to do something with climate change, nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we doing? Why aren't things changing? Why is nothing happening? That was the big question. And the 7th wicked problem, so I don't forget, is population and migration. So parts of the world are depopulating rapidly because they're not having kids, and other parts of the world are exploding because they are having kids. And unfortunately, there's not a balance between these two because we've divided these lines and we don't let people move back and forth. Isn't it funny how our products can move seamlessly back and forth across borders, but people can't, because we have less rights in some ways than your television and the components in your TV. Okay, that's just not a joke actually, but it's just an illustration. Yeah.
And it sounds very believable. So, with that context, on the book itself and the framing of it, Christian, I'm curious to know, did you find that at the time that you decided to write the book, the framing of how people were looking at the variety of problems that existed at the time, and obviously all of that exists even now, and therefore this framework helps in looking at it in a different way. But when you decided to write it at that time, was it that it was too complex, there wasn't a simple enough way of looking at it? Or
In fact, the whole point goes back to systems thinking, and we did a simplified version of systems mapping where you look at the negative impacts and the positive impacts as 2 different diagrams, even though they're actually the same thing. And what we did is try to start looking at the underlying problems. So one of our wicked problems was, for example, the death of nature. And what we said is the death of nature is happening for many reasons. Habitat loss. Now, why is habitat loss happening? You know, uh, let's say food waste. You know, that's part of how we waste a lot of our lot of waste in our system comes from agricultural waste. You know, a lot of our land is actually being used to cultivate crops, of which 50% are thrown away. Then we use pesticides as part of this process, you know, and all those pesticides also killing the insects. So there's a whole chart we did on the insect apocalypse. So I have to say, it wasn't just me. It was a group of maybe 15 people in this working group that worked to create these charts and talk about them. And we did webinars and we met. And this was about 5 years ago started. We've been working on this for a long time. And then finally, we decided to put the book out and say, okay, you know, that's enough. We've done enough mapping. And in between, like I said, I took a break to write that other book on regeneration because I felt like it was very important to, instead of having this negative book of all the world's problems, I had to have a positive book that would answer sort of a way out of this mess. And that's what, you know, a lot of this has to do with Philip Kotler's vision for a future that is very inclusive and really is about, you know, that marketing is a force, not just to sell stuff, but also to create a better world. That there's no point selling crap to people that they don't need, which they can't afford. That's not marketing. That's actually mass manipulation. So
That's the status quo. That's been the case for so long.
yes, that's really the history of the modern era. If you really think about it, it's actually so capitalism in some ways, and we point this out in the book. We even have a nice chart about extraction and the exhaustion of both land and people, which is sort of the heritage of colonialism, but is now turned into capitalism because really, what difference is there between the East India Company and let's say a global multinational that's sucking out profits from the land? And so the idea was, okay, and regenerative business must be the exact opposite of that. It's got to be one that when it lands in the territory, it actually makes the territory blossom and the communities blossom. So it brings wealth to the place, not to a few individuals so there can be more income inequality, but it distributes and creates, let's say, like when it rains in your yard, you know, it's not just two roses that grow, it's everything grows. So we want to see a world that's more equitable at the same time. You know, and why has this happened? You know, again, it's going back to our history of colonialism, and that was part of the Wicked7 book as well. We had to go back to the root causes and ask why, and go backwards. So if your readers are interested, there is a methodology that we developed, you know, that goes into how do you look at the root cause of a problem and go backwards. And it's actually really useful to say we need to look at the historical roots of wicked problems, because sometimes the boundaries that we assign to solve a problem, the problem actually lies outside the problem, outside those boundaries.
And then that's a great segue in you know, in the way you've sort of brought that framing down into that specific thing. Is there a way of applying the Wicked7 framework at an individual level? So
Sure.
how would that
So,
work?
and you know, it's funny you should say that, but I'm actually looking at this new book that we're writing, the fourth book now with Phil Kotler and myself and Enrico Foglia, is about regenerative leadership. And we say, hey guys, we live in 5 worlds. So
Okay.
we live in the world of the individual. We live in the world of, let's say, community, you know, your family onwards. You live in the work world, the business world that you work and function in, whether it's the world of institutions and organizations. Then you live in your, let's say, regional or let's say national world. And then, of course, you live in the real world, which is the planet at a planetary scale. So how do you align these 5 worlds? And that's actually the story of this next book, which is that regenerative leadership comes from aligning these and working for the common good across all 5 of these worlds. Because if we did some analysis and we found out one of the root causes why nothing changes is because our leaders, or we call them misleaders, because they're not actually leading for all. They're leading for special interests and their friends and the people who paid them to elect them. So they're not really leading for all of us. And in fact, they are hurting most of us. So if you look at what the policies are of your government, you have to just ask, are they working for the common good, or are they working for special interests?
So
And the answer is pretty, yeah, go ahead.
no, so I'm just going to ask. So is it that because you've written about the modern perception, or let's say over the last 250 years, how capitalism has come into being, starting from the industrial age, so on. So are you therefore, and I might be oversimplifying this, but are you like, is it, are you saying we need to move more towards a pro-socialist sort of approach, a more kind of,
Okay, that's a great question.
yeah.
That's a great question. The problem with capitalism is that it doesn't have any boundaries. It can be checked because capitalism basically says that, if you use the virtuous cycle of capitalism, the rich guy just keeps getting on richer and richer and richer at the expense of what? At the expense of the environment and the expense of the people
Yes.
and nature.
Yeah.
So if you really, so in other words, you go, hey, let's do cost benefit analysis. So the costs are borne by the people and by the planet, and the benefits accrue to a few individuals. And this shouldn't be happening. Why? Because in nature, when that happens, when somebody gets too big, it's called a cancer. It's a tumor. It kills whatever it is that's living, that it kills the host.
That
The planet is the host, you could say. So, I mean, this is kind of an ugly analogy, but the point would be, okay, so for example, I'm not against entrepreneurship. I think entrepreneurship's great. And in fact, I feel like that's where we need to head, but to a kind of entrepreneurship that's much more collaborative and cooperative, and where the ownership is not owned by one guy, but many guys. In other words, the community-owned corporation, or so that you don't end up with corporations that end up with their sole purpose being profit. And in other words, they say, hey, here's somebody suffering, let's make money off that. And if you look at how the healthcare industry works, if you look at any crisis-based thing, it's all based on great profits based on the suffering and of others. So, in the US, for example, at one point, this is with Richard Nixon, and this is in the book, it's even in our Brand Activism book, healthcare was supposed to be a non-profit industry where you could not profit of the suffering of other people. So Richard Nixon wrote a law saying, and no, you can make as many profits as you can, go crazy, go nuts, make profits, it's good.
And today we live in the age of like corporate healthcare, where every doctor has limits.
Yeah, just try dying and see what happens. So what happens is, if you have a disease that is curable, they will not tell you exactly how to cure it. What they'll do is they'll find ways to keep you alive and feed you and until you run out of money. The minute you run out of money, they let you die.
Yeah.
And again, I'm only half joking. I'm really not joking. This is a very serious statement.
Yeah.
And in the US, even the old folks' homes and the system of looking after old people, which doesn't really exist very well in India. It's very privatized in India.
Yeah.
In the US, it's become a hedge fund thing. All the hedge funds and the venture capitalists and private equity have bought up all these hospices and places where you go to die with one thing in mind: profits. So they're going to cut costs, keep you alive, in a comatose state, give you drugs to not have you like completely immovable.
Yeah.
But as long as you're alive, they get to charge your family exorbitant rates to keep you alive. And again, that's just one example of one system, but I would challenge you to look at every system. And in our next book, we have 12 societal systems that we look at, and we look at each system and how it's become degenerative instead of regenerative.
Regenerative. So actually on that, Christian, because like you said,
I know.
and and we the last 10 minutes, I'd love, with this, with this great context and the fact that you're actually writing this book about regenerative leadership. So I have a couple of specific questions, and I'd love it if you could shed light on, for example, how can leaders get comfortable asking tough questions? What is it that typically holds them back from asking these tough questions? And when they have
Yeah.
answers to those, how can they get comfortable in sharing those answers? Because, a, a lot of the time it's about looking good, and as opposed to doing good. So,
Yeah, I mean, basically, there are a lot of fake leaders out there, what we call misleaders. So
yeah,
these are leaders who are in it for themselves and their own private gain. They just want to make more money, make more whatever, get more status, climb up the corporate ladder, blah, blah, blah. And there's lots of these guys. I mean, this is sort of the corporate world. And our CEOs, deliberately make these guys compete with each other so that the survival of the fittest, the best guy gets to the top.
yeah,
This kind of competition is actually a disaster. So I would say the opposite is really what needs to happen. The distance between the leaders and the people needs to come down. And
yeah.
if you look at the best managed businesses, there's really, the leaders are part of the team. They know what's happening. They don't just walk the talk. They actually are involved in what's happening. They know their employees. And it goes back to people like Alexander the Great, who fought with his troops, not from the back, but in the front.
Yeah.
So, one, there has to be a very small distance between you and as a leader and your people who you lead. The greater that distance, the more of a bubble there is, and the more, it's all optics after that.
And how should
Second,
we think of like inviting people along this journey?
yeah, I mean, part of it is if you look at an entrepreneur, when, let's say, a founder of a company, right?
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos was an amazing manager until he sort of started becoming a success. So if you look at the old Amazon, every time the one that operated out of the garage, right, the mythic Amazon, every time they sold something, a bell would go off and they'd be really happy and everybody was gung ho. But then became the corporate Jeff Bezos, back to his VC roots, and there was suddenly this big distance between employees and management. And
Mm.
actually, this is the heart of our capitalistic system, is that we've created a two-tier, first class, second class kind of society, because we don't have democracy in the workplace. I mean, it's really hilarious. If we don't have democracy in the workplace, eventually you won't have democracy anywhere else. Because the result of this income inequality has been all these billionaires have made so much money that they can afford to basically start their own space programs. I mean, that's your taxes doing that. They should have been taxed. Our taxes are creating private companies to send people into space. That money could have been spent on education. It could have
Yeah.
been spent on all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So there's this So, okay, going back to how do you ask tough questions? Safety, right? People, you can't have an environment of fear. And if you look at what is happening in the world today, is we are creating, and deliberately, a climate of fear where you cannot speak out, you can't dissent, you can't have opposing opinions. Everybody has to think the same, and it's top down. So this is not a new thing. This is called tyranny. This is called dictatorship. These are old models that are they're old as human beings have been around. The innovation actually was democracy. Democracy was the innovation, that everybody has a voice and we decide collectively what happens. That got hijacked. So today, even though we pretend we have a democracy, I mean, they're all funded, our politicians are all funded and picked by the corporocracy, by the corporations, and by the billionaires and oligarchs.
Oh,
So,
Lord,
I
yes.
mean, it sounds like I'm ranting and raving, but it's a fact. I mean, Michael Porter, who's sort of the Mr. Strategy Competitive Advantage, he basically wrote a book which says that Washington and our politics functions exactly how it's designed to function for the benefit of a very few number of people at the top. And this has killed everything. It's killed our democracy. It's killed our planet. And frankly, it's created now. The only way you think you can manage this now is with a culture of fear, where you basically shoot anybody who stands up and says, "Hey, but we're not, doing something right." So people, hide they put their heads down. And if that's the kind of company you're working for and that's the kind of manager you have, leave, find another place, because there is, or start your own company where you don't do that. I mean, there is another way, and that's part of the regenerative business approach, which is there are businesses, not a whole bunch of them, they're not the norm, but increasingly, there are companies and business school people and business managers and entrepreneurs who say, I don't want to manage like my parents did. I don't want to manage this company like a mafia system. I want it to be where everybody feels part of the team. And that's why, if you notice, the best teams really don't have superstars. They're all together.
Yeah.
And if there is a superstar, they're part of the team. It's when you have these individual stars and everybody's so great that the team doesn't function. That's been the problem, for example, with the Brazilian soccer team all these years.
Yes.
That's one reason why they left behind some of their great players.
Because it became about individuals. So
Because
actually,
they're such individuals, they don't care about the team. They don't care about the common good. So the primary function now, if we want a future, is how does what we do, how does this action or this idea or this policy or this product advance the common good instead of rob the common good and make value for, let's say, a company, but actually deplete and destroy value for the planet, its people, or the community.
So we just have a couple of more minutes. I just want to ask for, because you're writing about this book on regenerative leadership,
Yeah.
Christian, and you've obviously, some of the the broad framing that you've shared just now. What's maybe one or two companies that you found, or leaders of those companies who would seem to be doing a fantastic job?
Yeah. So, when Ben and Jerry's got sold to Unilever, they were a hippie company, right? They had these two crazy founders who made ice cream, which was too expensive. It probably had too much sugar in it. But they had this idea that even a product as dumb as ice cream can have a purpose that's beyond just selling an ice cream, right? So they created the social purpose and they wrapped this social purpose around this product. So it was a product which by itself was not regenerative, but because they wrapped this ideology around this product, they said, well, from our profits, we're going to fund democracy. We're going to fund prison reform. We're going to fund helping immigrants and so they've done a whole bunch of really amazing social things that a normal traditional company would not do because, hey, all that money could be given to our shareholders and we could maximize shareholder value and who cares about the community. Well, when they got sold to Unilever, they had one clause in there which said that we would still have this independent board that would create decide how Ben and Jerry's would do their strategy and spend their money and do that kind of thing. That independent board is now under attack. And so you have this big clash between this idealistic company, which, by the way, is very profitable.
Yeah.
And part of it is the appeal of this brand values that it has. And let's say the shareholder maximization thing, which Unilever now, after Paul Polman left, they lost their soul, if you will, and now they're back to being just any other company that's just cranking the money handle and trying to maximize shareholder value. So I would say at the top, there are not many companies that are actually regenerative. What we did find is a lot of small businesses that were very regenerative. One example, if you have 2 more minutes, I'll talk about it.
Please.
How much time we got? 2 more minutes?
We just have a minute to go, but let's
Okay.
a couple of minutes.
Okay, so I'll talk about a company we found in Palermo, in really the ghetto of Palermo, in the bad neighborhood of Palermo. There was this lady who had created a company, Lucia Lauro is her name, which brings these kids out of jail, gives them a job when they come out of jail. In fact, she hires them when they're in jail, so they start working on making cookies and stuff inside the jail. When they come out, she knows what kind of values these kids have, so she hires them in her restaurant and Airbnb. And the amazing thing about it is this place is growing like crazy, but its purpose is not to make profits, but it's growing nevertheless, making great profits. And she doesn't maximize her value in the sense that she's paid the same salary as the highest paid employee. Do You see what I'm saying? So she's not the CEO who's driving a Ferrari at
Yeah.
the expense of her employees. She's part of the team. And that's an example of a very dynamic growth opportunity that's totally local. It's a regional company. It's not trying to be a great brand, and it's not trying to. It's growing, even though it's not focused on that. It's focused on doing good.
And that's amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that,
Sure.
Christian. You mentioned Ben and Jerry's. For the audience, the founders. It was founded by Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. So, and it's a well-known brand, much-loved brand. The world over, you get it in India as well now. So it's definitely worth going back in history and looking at some of the choices that they made, how they spoke about their their personal purpose. Because ultimately, a lot of the conversations that we do here is, when I invited Christian to be on the show, he said, are you sure you want to have a conversation with me? It might make you a little unpopular, but I think it's so important to have us, talk about things that are unpopular, because I mean, I want to live my life a certain way and have a certain kind of experience. And Christian, very evidently, you've done that for a very long time. And I think you should talk about things that give you energy. So we're 2 minutes over time, but I have two questions that I want to ask you. So personally, what gives you energy?
Well, it's my family, my wife, my kids. I mean, my world's really evolves around. So that's world number one, right? It's really where I live. And the fact that we're all doing fun stuff, we're all following our passions and supporting each other. And I drive my wife nuts, but she appreciates, let's say, some of the stuff we're doing, and we have a lot of fun together. So the bottom line is, your personal world, and then every other world, you try to align them as much as possible. And then the second thing is the people we meet. Along the way, there's some great people. Life is not really about anything else other than the beauty of nature and the beauty of people.
Yes.
And those are the two things that, as you go along, you'll meet some great people. Go spend more time with them.
Yeah, amazing. And what is one thing you could talk about every day for the next 1 year?
I believe it will be regeneration, because I think, because of this concept, that it really is a very old concept, right? It's the concept that everything we do is for the common good. And it's a very old Indian philosophy as well. So it's just as if, India lost its own soul by sort of buying into the MBA, view of how we need to run the country, which is the commercial way of running the country, rather than going back to our spiritual values. And if you look at all the spiritual values of all the traditions, including, let's say, the animistic religions and, let's say, the more popular religions on the planet, they all have the dimensions of the common good that I taught. In fact, we have an article about that on regenerationjournal.org. Okay, I'll shut up.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And lastly, if people have to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Just go to Christian at christiansarkar.com, or look me up on LinkedIn and just ping me on LinkedIn.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Karan. I enjoyed this. Great questions.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us. Next week, we have a conversation with Rahul Mathan. He's a senior lawyer based in Bangalore. He's worked on a wide variety of projects, including the Indian Aadhaar card, and he worked on the ruling for that, and a whole bunch of. So he's been a lawyer for a very long time, but we're going to talk to him about not being a lawyer, but about writing, because he's written a book. He's written a couple of books. He has a regular article, column in the Economic Times. So we're going to talk to him about the craft of writing, because I think interesting, lawyers work with the written word so extensively. So that's what we're going to do. But this is LinkedIn for Leaders this week. I look forward to you joining us next week. Thanks again, Christian. And
thank you.
Speak soon.